Hey everyone, this is Randy from BibleBuyingGuide.com, and I have an interview today with Tim Mahoney, a filmmaker. And I interviewed him last year. We talked about part one of a video series that he's made, and now we're here talking about part two. So I want to introduce Mr. Mahoney and have him talk about the video.
Well, hello, Randy, and hello, everyone. And it's great to be back on your program. And the Bible is really important. I've spent a lot of time investigating the historical credibility of the Bible. And this film that's coming out, it's going to be in theaters May 15th and May 17th. And we're just wanting to let you all know that this is a very important film for you to be a part of. I think the experience of it, I know, Randy, you just saw it. You can probably say for yourself what you think of it, but I think this is a dandy. And why is that the case? Is because we're going to take you to places and search for a pattern of evidence, looking for the true location of Mount Sinai. And I did something for those people who are interested. I created a Bible scorecard, a Mount Sinai scorecard. And the first film, we looked at 3 mountains in the very first film. And by the way, if you haven't seen the first film, you should, but it doesn't require you to see the first film, Randy, correct, to see the second film. They're 2 standalone films. Each one of them has a lot of content in them. And the second film, we're going to be looking at 3 mountains. One of them is in Israel, called Har Karkum. The other 2 are in Saudi Arabia. And this has been a forbidden location for a lot of people over the years, and now it's freeing up a little bit more. But this investigation has this approach. Once again, this is the pattern of evidence that we're looking for based upon scriptural text. And if you go to our website, patternsofevidence.com, you're going to be able to see, download the scorecard, and you're going to be able to see the scripture references for this pattern. You're also going to be able to see a map of where the mountains are, and somewhat of a timeline of the campsites and the wildernesses that the Israelites were in. I don't think anyone's really ever done this before like this. Have they, Randy?
I've not seen anything like this. And I like the way you put it together too. You don't say this is what it is. You analyze different places, but you do more than that. You go on location and see for yourself. But I'll get to that in a minute. But one thing I like about the way you do this is that you talk about the area, you talk about what the Bible says you should find, and you go looking for that. And so you step through it and you look at each piece of evidence individually. And then using that scorecard, we as the audience, we score what we think about it. You're not telling us what to think. You're giving us the information. And that's another thing I like to mention too, is about your approach to that information. I like the way you do that, because you're not skewing evidence. You're not trying to make one look better than the other. There are some people that you talk to that have some interesting ideas, but you treat them all the same. You give them all equal time. You give them all equal credibility. It's up to them to make their case. And then you let us decide. I like the way you do that. But a point I was going to mention too about you go on site. I've noticed that when I'm looking at Bible maps in Bibles or in Bible atlases of any kind, software or anything, I noticed that it looks like you can just go from here to here. But if you're only looking at a map, you don't really see how hard that is. And one of the things that you pointed out in the video is that your own location, and you show a video of where you are and what it looks like on the map. And it looks like on the map you should just be able to go there, but you can't really. You really have to go there to see it for yourself, don't you?
You do, because Deb Hearn, who's from Australia, she's a good example of working with the location at Har Karkum. And she said, oh, they just went over here. And then Tali, who is an Israeli archaeologist, she said, no, they didn't. There's no way you can get over there. And that's where, like looking straight down on a map from a satellite photo or whatever, you do not see the ridge or the mountain. You don't realize that, oh, it's not just like we can just climb over the top of that and come down. Especially if you have, carts and women and children. And, if you're fleeing for your life, you might make someone who's really strong and hardy and whatever could climb over a mountain, but you're not going to bring a group of people like that. And so that's the thing that's been, that's just one of the examples of, we talked about the wildernesses and the attributes of certain locations. So that's why this is very helpful to keep track of it, because in this investigation, we're talking about an awful lot. And we call the company Thinking Man Films, and it's our faith is based, we're supposed to love the Lord our God with all our heart, with all our mind, with all our soul. It's not just with your heart. It's a combination of things, and so that's why you got to think it through and see. Well, and there's believers, by the way, that look at all these different mountains and have good reasons for them. But what I can see, and you can see it in the film a little bit, is sometimes there's only a couple of things that they're looking at, right, Randy?
That's right.
There's just a couple of things that are emphasized, but they're ignoring a lot of other things. And that's when I was, as an interviewer, I was listening to them and I was like, okay, but there's some things that are missing here, right?
Exactly right. I've noticed that too. And another thing I noticed is that some will say this location, and they'll name the places, and they'll name the kind of things they're talking about. And they'll say it's over here. And then another person will say it's over here. And when I go to my Bible maps, a lot of times they don't say it's here or here. They say it's here. And so that kind of makes it a little bit difficult to follow. I don't want to say the Bible maps are wrong. It's just that sometimes we don't know. And that makes it difficult, doesn't it?
Yes. And in fact, in the first film, we talked about the Madaba map, which is a map in Jordan. And I went to be able to look at that. This is a map that was on a church floor. It's a very large space. Like I'm in the studio here, and they had tiles, and they were trying to show people where things were. And in the ancient world, the maps weren't always accurate. Obviously, they're misproportioned, and so maps are important. And then what happens is that because people are trying to give definition, they're basically saying, well, maybe this is the site of Elam, or this is Moses' well, or wherever. That's, and then the tradition grows up there for hundreds and hundreds of years, and sometimes 1,000 years, where everyone says, no, this is the place where it happened. For example, the traditional Mount Sinai, people would say, well, this is where we believe that it is. And then all the route, you got the names of the route all the way back to Egypt, right? Well, which came first? Was that the mountain, or were these route names given? Moses, though, gives an itinerary of the route and the campsites, and that's what we look at in the film. And you also have to take into consideration the distance that you could travel in a day, and how many campsites there were, and how long it took them to get to the mountain. And some people would say it'd be 45 to, I've heard, as much as 60 days. So if we look at that area there, and I'll just give you a little insight that when scholars have looked at caravans, those caravans can travel. Obviously, they've got camels, but they're walking alongside them. They can go about 20 miles a day, or they go about 20 miles a day. Let's say 20, 25 miles a day. But they're generally, most of the time, going between water sources. So they're kind of getting from point A all the way to point B, and there's a water source here and a water source there. If there's not, like across the Sinai, they have to take and bring water and carry that with them, and then work their way across the Sinai to the next water source. And so the Israelites were in the same challenge, right? They were crossing the Sinai, and some people say, well, they didn't cross the Sinai. They stopped in the Sinai, and others are saying, no, they crossed the Sinai because they had to get to the land of Midian, and that's in Bibles. Randy, where does a lot of Bible maps put Midian?
They put it to the east of the peninsula.
So that would be in Saudi Arabia, what's present day Saudi Arabia?
Yes. And then I've noticed some put it above, put it north.
Like in Jordan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How can we know? Or can we know?
Well, the archaeologists that I talked with that were Saudi archaeologists, they talked about this I'm trying to think of the name of it. Was it Kariah where? There's a couple of, in the film we talk about where did Jethro live and what do we know about Jethro, and Madian. So the name Madian and Jethro, and these names. The question is when were those names given and established there? But then there's this other pottery that shows up in that area too. So, and the Midians were travelers, and Midian was actually one of the sons of Abraham, I think by a concubine, and later when the sons of Abraham were told to go east, and they left his father, they traveled to the east, so that they were, and that gives you some clues to where they were, where Ishmael was, where Midian was. And then later, Midian's family grew and they became this group of people in that eastern area, east of the Promised Land.
So you talk about pottery and things like that too. You talk about the various things that you should find when a caravan makes their way from Egypt all the way through all of the places. So we should find a lot of different things that we could track that trail, such as pottery, such as even paintings on the rocks and things like that. And you point out a lot of this in the film. Also, I mentioned too that you go on location. You can't always, though, can you? What are some of the problems that you faced, that you yourself have faced by trying to go on location and see these places?
Well, the most obvious one happened to me, and believe it or not, Randy, 2003 was when I first went to Saudi Arabia. And we had permission to be there by the government. And we got a small group of people, some other ex-explorer people, some people that are in the movie, Dr. Glenn Fritz, Leonard Moeller, who has now passed away, and the Jim and Penny Caldwell. They were along on that trip, and we got permission. We couldn't believe it because the Caldwells had lived in Saudi Arabia before, and they were they were arrested a few times, and they had challenges when they were in the country, even though they had permission to be in the country, but not necessarily to be in that area. And so we went back to visit, and we had been given permission to be there by the government, except after we got there. That's when the locals said, no, you don't have permission to be here. You need to get out of here now. And they knew why we were there. And we were there because we were interested in Moses and the Exodus, and the events of the Bible there, in a mountain called Jebel Lawz. And there's actually two mountains. One's Jebel Lawz. It's like a ridge. It's just a whole ridge of mountains. And there's a peak here and there's a peak over here. The lower peak is called Jebel Makla. And that peak is the one that below that is where people were suggesting that there was an altar that potentially could be the sacrificial altar where the sheep came through. There were pillars there. There was a stream. There's a lot of things that were connecting. And that's what we came to see. And I brought a camera, and I asked permission to have a camera and a couple of video cameras. And I filmed amazing footage at that time. And after we were there, that's when we got into the hot water with the locals. And they said, you got to leave. And we were like, well, we're supposed to be here. And it was a problem. And it was a couple of weeks of a lot of stress in Saudi Arabia. And when I left, I didn't leave with any footage. I had to leave it behind. And so that was in 2023. And I thought, that was the most amazing trip that turned into a difficult trip that turned into what in the world just happened? And will I ever be able to make this movie if I don't have any footage? And here we are, Randy, 20 years later. Wow. Where I've have interviews and footage probably over the course of maybe 30 plus years that we've been able to make this film. And now we've gotten updated footage. We have great imagery of these different mountains. The other mountain in Saudi Arabia is a volcano, former volcano. And that's the other one we're looking at is Mount Better. And Sir Cullen Humphreys, who I've used in the past, he's from Cambridge. He was knighted. He's a believer, a scientist. And he believes that the Bible is describing a volcanic location because of the smoke and the fire and the shaking and the earthquakes and everything. And he believes that all that can be explained in a physical, understanding of things. And that's what he tries to do. So we were able to go to that mountain and film recreations. I didn't go personally, but I was able to send camera people. And if you've never seen anything like this, it's really something to be able to go and look at these locations. And that's why I think it's so important for your audience to be able to come. When these films are shown in a theater, it's like a life experience, because you're going to see something that most people don't get to see, and you're going to be able to be in places. We do know that the Israelites wandered in these areas, so you're going to get a feel for what it was like during the wandering. I think that obviously we've got recreations, and the Bible is going to come to life. That's the reason why I want to strongly encourage your audience to see this film, because the Bible's going to come to life. Bring your Sunday school class, bring your family. It's a thinking film. It's not for children, but it's for older children and young adults, and it will help them in their own faith walk to see that there is a pattern of evidence for the historical credibility of the Bible.
And this is part two. And like you say, you don't have to have seen part one to watch part two. So if you haven't seen it, don't worry about, don't think you can't go see this one. Go see this one. Tim does just pick up and go, but it makes sense. I didn't feel lost watching it. And you talk about the scorecard, you don't step through and explain all the little details, but it's self-explanatory. It's easy to follow. It's intuitive, like an intuitive website that you just know what to click on. You know what to do. It's easy, and you do show. This is the section we're talking about now. Grade this. What do you think about this? Another thing I like that you did was you create a timeline, and you show and you allow the people that you're interviewing to present different times for different things, and you show that on the timeline and show how all that correlates. So how hard was that to come up with those times to build that timeline?
The timeline comes from an earlier film called The Exodus, Patterns of Evidence, The Exodus. And we were dealing with different time periods. And so I used a wall, an Egyptian, I kind of mirrored archaeology that we saw in Egypt, which was this temple, and had this beautiful wall. And then, it had these columns. So everywhere there was a column was like 1,000 years. And that wall I put into a beautiful ancient valley, and that became what we call the wall of time. And we have different time periods. There's Egyptian time, there's Bible time, and there's like time of the Palestinian of the cultural time there. And what it helps is that when scientists or archaeologists were talking about things, somebody might say the Middle Kingdom. And you're like, what does that mean? And you can say, well, here's the time for the Middle Kingdom. Here's the New Kingdom. Now here's the Old Kingdom. And it was a way for you to see and visualize history. And that wall of time, then we were able to put the events of the Bible on the Bible timeline. So you've got different timelines. You've got an Egyptian timeline, you've got a Bible timeline, and then you've got an archaeological timeline, let's say for other parts of the Mediterranean and Israel and Palestine and that area. So that was a great tool. And once again, visually, so that people can understand, taking complex ideas and making them simple, simplifying them down so you can understand it. And I think that's the reason why the films have been successful, is that we help to just make you aware of what the meaning of a word is. Like proto means early. Sinaitic means from the Sinai. Early from the Sinai, So instead of someone saying proto-Sinaitic, you're like, what? Oh, now I understand what this is, And so that's been some of the reasoning behind all that.
Thinking Man Films is named well, because you present the information and you get us to think. and I like that approach. It's well named.
Well,
I'm
thank
gonna,
you. My daughter-in-law and I, we were driving down to the farm in Wisconsin, and just out to some relatives, and we were trying to figure out what to call this film company. And I said, it's these films are different. They got a little more. They're different than a lot of films I've ever seen, because you have to engage your mind. I try to make them very visual, very entertaining. There's recreations and drama in them, and then there's my own personal story. But there's a bit of intellectual context to them, and we've literally had scientists that are astrophysicists and nuclear people that said, we love these movies, because they're engaging. I've had 10-year-old kids. Now, here's something, Randy. There are times when I'll have 10 or 11-year-old children come up, and I can tell this potentially is a future something or other. He's a thinker. And it really is important, because there are young people today that have big questions, and they need to find answers for them. And oftentimes they find answers in other ways that don't point to a biblical understanding or a biblical foundation. That's the reason why I like having these films address this type of an audience. And then you start to realize, wait a minute, there are so many patterns that match the biblical text that you have a hard time, well, it just encourages your faith, and you have a hard time not believing.
That's very true. Another thing you mentioned too is that you make them a little personal, because you present a little bit of you in there, and I like the way you do that, especially watching you play guitar. Now, I'm a guitar player. I've played guitar since early '80s, and I play around on other instruments, keyboard and some other things, but I'll only
Yeah.
claim to be a guitar player. But you show several different instruments that you're just sitting around playing. How many instruments do you play?
About 6 or 7.
Wow.
But here's the thing about that is that I consider it, once you realize that the music is inside you.
Yeah.
So what happened was when I was growing up, we had a church orchestra, and at Sunday nights there would be a worship service where people could bring in their instruments. They had a little orchestra. Well, there was other guitar players there, and somehow at the early age of like 11 or 12, I realized, hey, these older boys, they're going to be playing guitar. There's no room for me. I thought I was interested in the lap steel guitar, and I got what would be called a Hawaiian guitar. And so my uncle got me Hawaiian guitar, and I started learning on that. So I still played guitar and learned that, but then I was playing the lap steel, and then I got what was called a pedal steel guitar. And then as time went on, I learned and built in high school a dobro, couple dobros, which is like a 6-string acoustic with a resonator, and a banjo, which I never finished because I graduated, and then went on and started playing the mandolin, and that was and then I started playing fiddle. One time I joined a bluegrass band as a fiddle player. I wasn't a fiddle player, but I just figured it out, I faked it for like 3 years in a bluegrass band as a fiddle player. And so those are my all those stringed instruments are mainly the ones that I play.
That's awesome. Fiddle is hard to fake.
Hmm.
If you can play a stringed instrument, strings on one hand and plucking with the other, it's easy to transfer that from one to another. I was in church and someone handed me a bass and I faked it. But if you play one, it's easy enough to transfer that. But that's not the same thing with fiddle.
You don't have any frets,
It's a different thing.
Yeah, the frets and the bowing, I tell you. Yeah.
That's a totally different thing. All right, so
it's hard for me.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say sometimes it's hard. I have to play a little bit. I'm almost irritating, I suppose, because I'm trying to remember where I am on the neck, to figure out where I'm coming in. But I just think it's encouraging. I always tell people the banjo's the guitar upside down backwards, and
that makes sense.
The mandolin, I should say, the mandolin is upside down backwards. But yeah, so I did incorporate those instruments in that part of my life, because that's probably it's investigating the Bible is on one side it's thinking and all that, but then there's the soul of us and there's the spirit of us. And Randy, I don't know if you saw, but the film focuses on worship. And I've been thinking, and I've dealt with fear, and I've dealt with fear, and I think there's a lot of people who have fear, and I've faced those fears by trying to go out and and be courageous, like going into the Middle East when lots of people don't go there, so. But it's not that I didn't feel fearful. I just had to somewhat pray and overcome that fear. But, sometimes fear wants to come back. And it's like there's a little shelf in our heart or our mind for fear. And, we can overcome it, but then we have to keep that shelf clear because there's stuff that wants to always be put back on it, whether it's our job or are we going to have enough money to pay for this or that, our health or whatever it is. And there's these fears that you can have. And last several years, I've had fear about different things. And I'm looking at the Israelites and I'm starting to think about them. Boy, they had a lot of fear. They were fearful about, being killed by the Egyptians at this Red Sea, right? Then God miraculously saves them from that. Not only that, they had just seen 10 plagues and they were miraculously saved from the angel of death in the Passover. And so they've had a few big events. And yet they forget. So they get out there and now they're thirsty and they're fearful they're going to, they're not going to have anything to drink, which understandable because when I went out to those locations and you realize how far away you are, the further you go into the wilderness, that further you'd have to come back for water or something. So they're like, what are we going to drink? They don't know where they're going exactly. What are we going to eat? And God miraculously provides for them water. He gives them manna. Then he gives them quail. Finally get them to the mountain. But all along the way, they're fearful and they're complaining. I don't know if all of them were, but a lot of them were. Right. And am I any different, Randy? I look at my own life and I go, man, God has provided for me over and over and over again. And here I'm worried about, what's going to happen in the fall or in the summer or this. I'm fearing. And I've been really convicted by that.
And you did mention worship. Let's see, it's wanting to. All right. It's still recording. You did mention worship in the film, and I appreciate that. I appreciate, first of all, I appreciate the films you make. I know those are not easy. Those are very difficult films to make. You can't just go there. You don't do that, and so it's difficult to do. And then gathering that kind of information, that's not something that you just get. You have to work on that information. So I appreciate the work that you've put into these. So you mentioned that this will be in the theaters, and this is part 2. I've seen both parts. I personally prefer part 2, although part 1 was awesome. If you only see one, see part 2, but please watch both. But you said that this will be in the theaters. How can our audience watch this film?
Patternsofevidence.com. Patternsofevidence.com is a really simple way to go and see, and you're going to see the movie. You're going to, you can hit the trailer. You're looking for, and it's going to say buy tickets. And at that location, it's going to take you to Fathom Events because this is a Fathom event, which means that it's a movie, but it's an event. After the movie, there's an event. And you can put, when you hit buy tickets, it's going to show you what the trailer is. And you can type in your zip code and it'll show you what theater would be available. And it gives you more information about the movie. At our website, patternsofevidence.com, you can download this document in both places. You're going to be able to download the scorecard at our website or at the Fathom event website. And you're going to be able to look at 2 nights, Monday night, the 15th, or Wednesday night, the 17th. And so that's basically how to go about doing this. And once again, I want to encourage people because this is only going to be there one time. I mean, if the tickets are sold, we've seen people have driven a long way and then got the ticket in the theater and they go, hey, there's no more tickets sold. And we're encouraging people to help us buy your tickets now because it lets the theater know. We've got over 700 theaters right now that are going to be showing this around the country. And So you need to buy the tickets now and reserve your spot, and then invite your Sunday school class, your Bible study group, your friends or neighbors. Maybe you've got some children that you've been trying to figure out a way to connect with them, and maybe you take them to a movie and enjoy this, because afterwards you're going to have a lot to talk about. And then Randy, finally, this film focuses on, at the very end of this film, the Israelites were supposed to go there to worship God. And in this journey to Mount Sinai, I show a recreation of the Israelites worshiping God. And then my bonus or added value to this is that I actually pull out the guitar. And did you see that part? Was that in the film?
Yep, sure is.
Okay. Yep. And I'm like, well, I'm not necessarily a worship leader, but I wanted to be obedient because I felt I was supposed to lead people in a time of worship. So we're going to stand up and we're going to worship God. And I think it's important for us to know how to revisit that. And I know there's a lot of people are doing that, but the reason for that is that we don't know what the future holds. And I believe that it's possibly there might be difficult times ahead. And what God was showing me during my time of fear was that if I took out the guitar, and not everybody has a guitar, but if I just spent time worshiping the Lord, all of a sudden the things I was afraid of started to diminish. And I think that's what the Lord was showing me, was that I needed to encourage people. And we're going to encourage people all across the nation at that theater, theaters all across the nation, to stand up. But at the very end, we're going to do 3 songs and worship the Lord with a very special group. This is a group of people who have been in slavery to addiction. And it came to me that I should ask this group of people to come, and they came, and now they've been freed by the power of the gospel. And they are going to join me, and we're going to sing some songs that are very appropriate to worship God. And that's how this movie is going to end. So I think it's going to be a very powerful and uplifting event. And for some people, this might be life-changing.
Yeah, easy. I can see that. Absolutely. So go watch it. Go watch Patterns of Evidence, Mount Sinai. This is Journey to Mount Sinai, Part 2. And it'll be in the theaters May 11th. Is that what you said?
No, May 15th on a Monday and May 17th on a Wednesday.
15th and 17th. And that's coming up in just 2 weeks. So go watch it. Do you have any other last words for our audience?
Well, I think that being in the theater is different than watching this on a DVD or on your phone or whatever, your computer. You're going to have an experience in the theater that you will not get. It's going to be an unusual experience. I think you're going to have a sense of being there. And I think it's important for as many people also to support these types of films. We've got more films that have been coming out. What we're doing is vote for this film, vote for the Bible. When you buy the ticket and you get some tickets, even if you want to buy some extra ones and give them out to friends, you're voting and you're telling the world that I want to see more films like this. And you're going to enjoy this one. I can tell you, you're not going to be disappointed. This is going to be a very inspiring film for you and your family and your friends. And you have a lot to think about, right? And you're going to have a lot to talk about, and you're going to be greatly encouraged.
I agree 100%. Go see it. Thanks. And I can't wait to see what you do next. I'm looking forward to it.